Instagram. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Eating at a Meeting. I am in the office and talking to my friend Zoe. I do this wrong all the time. And who is the founder of Grow with Zomo, an independent equity, diversity, and inclusion consultant, helping leaders in the hospitality, events, and tourism industries develop strategies to improve workplace culture and hospitality ecosystem. And I love that ecosystem. I don't know what just happened. So hi, my friend. How are you?
Hey, what's good? I think we're about to just jump right back into our conversation that we were just having. So, hi, friend.
Exactly. So we were at a convention last week, and you said to me, "Hey, I've been thinking about you, and so tell the audience why you were thinking about me as it relates to event food and beverage."
Yes, definitely thinking about you. And I was like, we have a lot to discuss.
Yeah.
And
Carolyn says excited to hear this interview. Hi, Carolyn.
yeah, hey, Carolyn, how are you? My fellow Event Leadership Institute professor, instructor. Okay.
Yes, yay.
So, yeah, we do have a lot to discuss because this year has been, very much event focused for me. So, I do event planning for the most part for my own research, right? Which I feel like improves me or my services as a consultant. Because what is it to consult event planners and venues on executing events and not have the boots on the ground experience? And
Right.
so, consistently through the year, working with different clients, I've seen the struggle for clients to communicate the needs of their networks, their communities, their attendees to the F&B team at a hotel, a venue, or wherever they're hosting their event. And this struggle has been on both sides, where
Mm-hmm.
um, the client is getting last minute information about someone's food restrictions, preferences, needs, and then the F&B team either does not have that information in the way that they needed, does not have the trained staff, and so I was like, there's this Tracy on my shoulder saying, Zoe, email me, talk to me. And I'm like, what would Tracy do? It should be, a t-shirt. So yeah, we have a lot to
Oh,
discuss.
okay. I'm going to make a t-shirt. Yeah.
What would Tracy do? I would wear it. I would
Right.
wear it. But
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, a lot of times you came up in my mind and I was like, what is the best way to go about this? Like, I can't be mad at the F&B team, or can I? The client has all these questions about, gluten-free and vegan and this and that. And how do I properly advise and consult both the client and the venue, or, to help properly execute this event? So yes, you have been on my mind.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I'm hoping. I mean, that's in a good way,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
what I've been advocating for. I don't want to say push, advocating for
Mhm.
14 years now. And it and let's just go back to the conversation that we were having, tie that into the conversation we were having before we went live. And it was about the woman at this convention we were at. She sent me a note on LinkedIn saying that she had shared that she was we got a Carolyn's like, let's make that shirt. Yes, ma'am. And then and then Joan is on here. Look forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Joan.
And Devin, hello. So going back, so she sent me a note on LinkedIn. She was in the same conference we were at. She had put on the note that she was allergic to hazelnuts and that she
Mhm.
was contact allergic to hazelnuts, meaning she could not be in a room with it.
Mhm.
And to the point where if somebody touched a hazelnut or there was hazelnut oil on a table or anything, she could actually go into anaphylactic shock.
Right. Right.
And so her discomfort, and thankfully it was the very end of it was the very last break
Right.
of the whole conference. And so her discomfort, where does that lie, right? and
Right.
and let me add to that story, because she did say, she asked the server, she's like, what kind of nuts are in these brownies? And the server said, well, those are walnuts.
Mhm.
And the chef was behind that and said, there are also hazelnuts in those brownies.
Mhm.
Because she did question it. She's like, that one doesn't look like a walnut. And the chef said, hey, that is a hazelnut.
Mm.
And so she looked at the chef and said, "You just saved my life."
Yeah.
And
Oof.
so, which is very daunting and scary, right?
Very.
And so your question to me beforehand was, where does that and I'm going to paraphrase this, kind of,
Yeah.
where does that responsibility lie? Is
Right.
it on that person, and or is it on the servers? Is it on the event planning team? Is it on the chef? And then how does your love of hazelnuts, you
Mhm.
know, get, and then my friend Leanne, I have my friend Leanne's head on my shoulders here, when because she
Mhm.
fights for advocacy of no nuts on airplanes.
Mm.
And um and the people who were like, well, just because he's allergic to nuts doesn't mean I can't have nuts on this airplane, right?
Mhm.
So
How do
disconnect,
yeah, how do you unpack all of that, right?
yeah.
Like,
Hmm.
you know, it's the I had a whole bunch of questions for you, and as a
Yeah.
consultant, that's pretty much what I do is I ask these questions to
Hmm.
unpack this very, challenging, things that we face. And in this is a very challenging, occurrence where you have someone who it is a life or death experience that they could have if they were to digest those hazelnuts. And so
And
when you
she was
told,
touched. Yeah.
right, when you told me that she pointed to the chef and said, "Hey, you just saved my life," I was like, "Whoa!" Imagine, were the event planners prepared for that situation?
Hmm.
Was she wearing an identity bracelet on what to do if no one knew what her situation was? Why was there miscommunication between that front of house, that server, and that chef who's more back of house? Like,
Hmm.
where did that disconnect come from? Where did the information get lost on, her
Hmm.
registration form? Why didn't someone flag that or identify that? Is it because that people had so many things going on? So by asking all of those questions, we can get to solutions because I'm very solution oriented. And my
Right.
question to you was, what would you do? Is it a sign that you put up, hey, these are hazelnuts? But like you said, that sign alone wouldn't solve what she would endure if she were even to come in contact with
Right.
hazelnut dust or the oils, because her particular circumstance is that severe with engaging or interacting with hazelnuts. And so I'm like, what can we do? In the situation where someone
Hmm.
like me who loves hazelnut everything is in the same conference or an event with somebody who has a life and death situation,
Right.
how much can we center ourselves and disregard someone else's needs? And so trying to understand that in the planning of an event takes us back through where the process begins, right? Where the
Hmm.
process
Yep.
begins and who's responsible through this entire process.
Right.
That's
And my
all.
thing, those are, and those are questions, all of those questions that you asked are so important to be, to address through the entire planning process, right? And one of the things that I said in my session at this convention is that, and I say it at every session that I teach, is that
I
food is our, thank you very much. And I showed my mom the video that you did and she liked my outfit. So um which is the most important part, right? No. But it's food and beverage is our number one expenditure,
yeah.
and we spend the least amount of time on it typically,
Oof.
right?
Yeah.
And we're thinking about, and all details that we want to know, but who's the speaker, do we have the speaker's photo, do we have transportation, do we have AV, all of these other things that go into meeting planning, which are all those details are important, but so is the food and beverage, and coming down to that detail.
Mhm.
And so, kind of going back to that list of questions you had, my question is, did you even have that brownie to even know that you, a lover of hazelnuts, would you
Mhm.
have missed that
Mhm.
brownie if it only had walnuts in it, right?
Mhm.
And not the hazelnuts, if you had that, right? Did that hazelnut actually make that brownie better for the
Mhm.
sake of someone's life?
And the answer is absolute no. Right? Like
Yeah.
I would have never not known if it was.
Right.
And that's answers the first question as far as people centering themselves. And I think you use that example of Leanne advocating for no nuts on the plane, right? You're taking this flight, and will having no nuts on your flight really make or break where you're going on your trip?
Right.
If it means the life of someone else. So the answer is no there. But in this conversation, I need to know, because this would be a client that I would consult, or you would consult, or we
Mhm.
would
Mhm.
collaborate together on how to solve this. Because if it had not been for that chef being present at that moment, right?
Mhm.
That's been a serious medical condition for which, if she was not wearing identity bracelets, someone may not have known what caused her going into anaphylactic shock, right?
Mhm.
So we
Right.
have to go back through this process, and it begins with the registration form, right?
Right.
Uh, when people are registering for your events, we know that event planners have a million things going on, but when it comes to food and beverage being that number one expenditure, being a primary focus of your event, that can make or break someone's experience, there needs to be someone who is keenly focused on the details that come across,
Mhm.
in that registration form. Now, is it that someone has to comb through every registration, or you have it set up on the back end where it, notifies you, hey, we have someone who has a life or death request, and we need to be mindful of this in a way
Mhm.
that we curate that menu that is centered around them. Because
Right.
this is a matter of preference. This is not a matter of, oh, I love hazelnuts. This is the matter of, this may be the end of me, right? And so the
Right.
gravity
Right.
of their request is something that needs to be a part of our morning briefings, right?
Right.
Like,
Mhm.
it, it's not, it's as important as, getting all the speakers lined up, the doors open, and everything that's going to get
Mhm.
that up and running. Hey, everyone know on the catering staff, everyone know on the staff, we have a hazelnut allergy that is the severity of death, and we all need to be alert. Even if
Right.
this not on the menu, but say someone brings in hazelnuts, right?
Right.
Like, we need to be
Mhm.
that mindful, and receive that in a way as an attendee, that if that information is, shared with you, that, hey, we have a hazel nut allergy on site, we are asking that no one, brings hazelnuts to the event. Your reaction is not knee jerk, where you're like, oh, but what about me and my love for hazelnuts? But rather, wow, I did not know that that kind of allergy could be that severe. And
Right.
it's that moment deepen your empathy. But yeah, it is something where,
Yeah.
excuse me, it is something where we have to go back through that process, starting with that
Yeah.
registration form. And,
Well, and it reminds me too of well, and actually, like 2 weeks beforehand, I was planning an event, and I had some woman write in that she was allergic to all nuts.
mm,
And I chatted with her, and she could not be in the room with it. So I reached out to my hotel, and I said, "Okay, we have this situation, and I want to make sure that our event is completely nut free,
mhm,
and so that in our meeting space there's no nuts." And they're like, "Well, we're not a nut free environment." I said, "I understand that, and the
mhm,
attendee understands that, but because I have all of your meeting space and 95% of your sleeping rooms, I
right.
want you to make my event nut free." And like, okay, this is not, and
Period.
this is not about me or my love of passion of making sure people have food. I don't want your hotel guest to
Mhm,
die, you know?
mhm, mhm,
And so I put it in that kind of context.
right,
And so it was written on every one of my BEOs, no nuts, no nuts, no nuts.
right.
Walked into my staff room, there
Mhm,
are cashews and pecans.
yeah,
Day one. Thankfully, no one else is there, right?
right.
But day two, when my first breakfast is being served, and the server who served my staff room
Mhm,
was there, he saw the muffins, and
mm,
2 out of the 4 muffins contain nuts.
mm, yeah, yeah,
And but he's like, "Tracy, I'm pulling these." And so I that to me,
mhm,
talking through that process what you just mentioned, he knew,
mhm,
right? And he read his BEO. And that's where I've said so many times, especially about the people who serve us as
Mhm.
servers or whatever who don't speak English, give them the tools to do their job,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And not that he spoke English perfectly fine, but he noticed it,
Yeah.
and they're the boots on the ground.
Yeah. And again, I'm wondering, I'm a process
Mhm,
person, right? And
mhm,
so we oftentimes when I talk about how EDI gets aspirational,
right,
the kind
mhm,
of like all the things we want to achieve and how great it would be to make sure that we have servers like that who are going to pull the muffins with nuts. And it would be amazing if everybody read their BO, right? But right? And that's where it starts for me. I need to know what is that process that's hindering people moving so fast that they're not reading
mhm,
their video? And what kind of signage do we need to implement on rooms or in that morning briefing that says this is a nut-free zone? We have had
mhm,
it cleaned, we've had it disinfected, whatever we had to do prior to this event, because this is what this client want, because they have 95% of our rooms and 95%
mhm,
of our space. We have disinfected. And from this date to this date, we are no nut zone. Like it is a nut free zone. And what that means is you will not bring in snacks. It will not be on the menu. Like that starts with the briefing.
mhm,
Then on each room, whether it's color coded or worded that this is a nut free zone to be reminded, if it's a part of the MC's announcements, where do we make it where,
right,
where it's there's so many touch points, right? Where
right, mhm,
it's not this excuse of like, oh, my bad, right? Like you can't, that can't be the response to something that one, I've paid my money, I've invested into your venue. So this is a request that I have. And two,
right,
the severity. And even if it's not on the spectrum of severity, even if it's not severe, life and death, this is someone's experience. So how do we, and that would be the question I want to answer for,
mhm,
in starting all the way back to, and we had this conversation on site, starting all the way back with the sales team, right? Do you
right,
know which venues and F&B teams are going to accommodate according to my request? Because don't waste my time when I'm doing site visits, when
right,
you're showing me all these fancy hotels and venues and places to go. If this F&B team is not prepared for requests that accommodate my attendees, I can't invest my money there. And
right.
so I need
Yeah,
you to be educated, right? And
yeah.
so, yeah,
Well, and
process.
that takes me back, oh my gosh, 7 years when I did a site visit with my client, and the CVB salesperson
Mhm,
communicated, asked all of us in advance who had, if anybody had dietary needs, communicated to all of our venues, and we sat
mhm,
down for a chef's dinner or chef's lunch, and the
mhm.
first thing they brought out to me was my allergy in full force, right? And
Mm.
and he said, "We missed it." He literally said that in front of my clients. And my clients are like, "You just lost a 300 and something $1,000 event because of
Right,
that."
right,
Right?
right.
And
Attention. I was in the
my
military.
yeah, attention to detail. Mhm.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but yeah, that's
No, you're
that's the
good.
first thing to mind when you said that, that 300, and that's, as I've gotten more and more into, educating and doing workshops on EDI, it started from a place of morality, right? And it's always gonna be that,
Mhm,
because I'm always gonna be concerned with people's experiences and, their feelings of belonging and all that. It has grown and evolved into a space of strategy. That's why I specifically say strategic EDI consultant, and how it impacts the bottom line of those who are
mhm,
part of executing an event. And that spoke to me when you said, because you missed it, oops, you just impacted your bottom line. And now you're negative 300,000 plus,
mhm,
dollars because you missed it. And that one can't be the response. And two, what are you going to do in response? Like educating yourself and your team to make sure this doesn't
mhm.
happen again. Because
Right.
serving you food that is going to, cause a reaction in you, or, reduce your experience is not something to take lightly. Right. And so
Right.
that should go on that person's report as to find out, why did you miss it? Were
Mhm.
you too busy? Where your bandwidth too low that you weren't reading the request? And maybe we need to now bake that into your time preparation, and
Right.
confirmation of the BEO, banquet event order, with the client and with your team, to understand
Mhm.
all the recipes, to make sure that when you are working with this client, you get them in the beginning because you're paying that much attention to detail. And then the day of the event, you also confirm with the client, what are your protocols for making sure that you abide by this. Like, it
Right.
just has to be a
Yeah.
part of the process. That's the military side of me, but
Mhm.
that clarity and
Oh,
communication has to happen
yeah.
all the way through
All the
every
way
role.
through. All right. Devin
Mhm.
just piped in here. Attention to detail when we're all overworked and reactive doesn't allow space for us to be safe and create the right experiences.
Mm,
That's you hit the nail on the head right there, Devin. So
yeah,
true. I'm really
yeah.
bad at my those phrases. Never get them right. But it is. I mean, and even and I don't know if I told the story the last week, but it's like even when I'm in an event and I had to use my Google app,
Mm,
translator app to type in, do you have any gluten-free desserts to show it to the servers, right?
mm,
And then
mhm,
they so that they could understand what I was trying to ask. And then they read that and they're like, "Oh yeah," and and they went and got me one. But it is it is that attention to detail, and it's hard.
right.
I'm gonna say it's hard because a lot of these servers, I mean, I was lucky 2 weeks ago that all of my servers were the A-level servers, so they're the full-time, right?
Mhm,
But if your event is so big that you've got the A, the B, the
mhm,
C level servers
mhm,
who haven't worked in your venue,
mhm,
you know, recently or ever, they're coming in and they don't know how to answer those questions. You've got to have that
mhm,
pre-show conversation with all of your servers in the language that they speak,
mhm. Yeah,
um, and have a method for them to have a
ab
process, have a method for them to be able to answer that question.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, that again goes back to professional development in our industry, or in
Mhm,
these different sectors. We're talking specifically about culinary, F&B, food and beverage. But yeah, no matter how often your staff works at your venue, or how well versed they are in recipes and ingredients, and there has to be a way in which they are briefed, right? That is the
mhm,
responsibility. Like, one of the things with being a leader is that you lead people in the proper direction, right? And so you have to give them the information that they need to empower them. Like, one of the things, I do a lot of day of event support. And
mhm,
so 2 weeks prior to doing that day of event support, I sit with, who's hired me, and I say, I want contact information for everybody that I'm working with. I want the chef, I want the security team, I want the photographers. I want all the information so that I can reach out to them and let them know, hey, I'm the on-site event manager. And if I have questions, here's my, cell phone number. If I need to text you while I'm in the event, if I need to ask you a question, I want to be
mhm,
empowered and informed. And that is something that we need to do more in our industry, is that you're not just a server. You are the bridge between the chef who has prepared this delicious cuisine and that guest experience, right? So we
mhm,
need to use our words in a way, because words have power, that let people know that you are not just anything. You are a part of this experience. And one of the things I
mhm.
say in emails as an event manager with any vendors or key stakeholders, I say, thank you so much for your contribution to making this an event a success,
Oh, that's awesome. I like that.
because
Yeah,
you are a part of this,
yeah,
right?
mhm,
Like, that
yeah,
money that I invested, that role that I have, we are a team. This is not a
right.
me and versus you thing. This is, I need to I repeat information. If someone says to me that there's a hazelnut allergy, or that there is someone who is gluten free, hey, excuse me, I know you are over the kitchen and you're going back and forth. Did you know that we have a hazelnut allergy on the floor or in the event? And did you know there's gluten free? Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, can you pass that along to everybody and just, make sure that
Mhm,
we're all on the
yep,
same page? All right, good. So
Yeah,
remind me if I say something otherwise, we're a team. Let's collaborate. And
right.
so it has to that level of thinking and I went to culinary school, right? I didn't last very long. Shout out to Stratford University in Baltimore, Maryland. But going to culinary school did teach me that level of communication, that the chef is moving fast, within the kitchen, but whether it's signage, whether it's a briefing beforehand or letting everybody know the passion behind the meal they created before they're engaging with the food
Hmm.
so that it can be an extension of what has been prepared in the kitchen.
Right. That's
So,
awesome. I couple of things just popped into my head based on some of the things you had, but I want to address a couple of things that so Devin put up here. What about a clause in the agreement that will forfeit food and beverage revenue if they don't adhere to the agreements?
woo,
Why not? I
let's look
like that,
at
Devin. Yeah, I mean, because
oh,
Devin,
yeah.
on the side that and on the side that, hey, we if we don't meet goals, if we don't meet the deadline to submit our menus, we lose our 10% discount or we get charged an additional 25%. Let's put it back on to those hotels and say, if you don't meet our what we say in the contract, you will also forfeit that. I love that, Devin.
I mean,
Um,
that gets
yeah.
straight to the point. Again, it's that
Mhm,
conversation. Like I said, when I was teaching those workshops, and I would say diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's important. There would be people, finance team, probably F&B, that would get up and leave the workshop. Be like, okay, this doesn't pertain to me in this meeting. But when I changed the title of those sessions, how I can make you money, save you money, and help you stop losing money, then people didn't leave their seats. And
mhm,
so a clause like that says, you're going to lose money. You're going to lose that $300,000 because, oops, you missed a gluten-free allergy, in trying to win business, and how many other amounts of business that you have lost because people see that it's not communicated on your website or on your menu,
mhm.
that you're knowledgeable about these different food restrictions and preferences. Like,
Right.
I myself do not have any, it hasn't been identified as of yet that I have a gluten-free allergy. I know I'm lactose intolerant, but I also know what foods make me feel uncomfortable, right? I know how it's going to impact my experience. So the more knowledgeable that the chef is, the F&B manager, the catering
Mhm.
manager, the bakery are about the food that's prepared, the more comfortable I feel. So if I know that their money is on the line, they know their money's on the line, they're going to ensure my experience. If your
Yeah.
pay,
Yeah.
if your incentive is impacted, yeah, we need to have that conversation.
Totally. Yeah.
Go Devin for the win for the clause.
Yes, love that, Devin. So Amelia says, in the interest of time, I'd love to hear about some specific ways to mitigate these issues we are also familiar with. Good
Hmm.
point, Amelia, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of different ways and a lot of the challenges that we all have, right? One, I like what Devin just said, putting
Hmm.
that in the contract, and actually some other things that I put in my contracts are that, at least the ones that I negotiate,
Hmm.
are you have the hotel identify, or the catering company, how many people on the staff have gone through food allergy training,
Yeah.
right? So it's, and then who is there, how many food safety managers
Mhm.
trained in food allergies will be on site,
Yep.
during my event.
Mhm.
um Devin just put in the for the win. That's funny. You're cute. And so that's one thing, but bringing a story into mind
Mhm.
is an event that I attended. This was coming out of the pandemic, right? The hot dis all the hot items from for the meal portion were
Mhm.
labeled with allergens, with
Mhm.
what they contained and what they were free of. But when you went to the desserts, nothing was labeled except for the name of the food.
Mm.
And I
Mhm.
found the pastry chef and I found the head executive chef, and they're like, well, we didn't communicate it to them. We didn't communicate it to the pastry chef that they needed to label their food.
No.
So Amelia, on that note, is one, that
Mhm.
pastry chef should also be at the pre-con meeting, and the
Mhm.
pastry chef should also be CC'd on every email that's coming through around food and beverage.
Right.
If the executive chef is CC'd, and I'm saying that for the fact that there's the executive chef, then there's the garde manger, there's the pastry chef, there's, all these different chefs. I don't want you to put 50 different chefs on there, but that's a very distinct chef
Mhm. Mhm.
that has a completely different role that I think would be really important in that
Yeah,
conversation.
I think when you're thinking about processes, right? Like for Amelia and for the key takeaways from this whole conversation is it begins with that initial inquiry, right?
Mhm,
And that's more than likely in our RFP. And so we need to start learning how to ask these questions, um, and how we're going to make our decisions on what venues we select. Like you listed that one question, right? How many people are trained in food allergies that are on your staff? Now, as it stands right now, there are probably many venues and F&B teams that are going to be like, what? Like, is that a part of Serve Safe, right?
mhm,
Is that a part of the training that's required? Maybe we don't have any, but maybe that light bulb is going to go off that in order to win this business, we need to get trained in that
mhm,
particular professional development, that certificate. Um, so RFP, those questions in your RFP, and we could spend hours talking about different RFP
mhm,
questions, but you have the power of the purse, so your RFP. Then your contract that you're writing. That's that clause that Devin mentioned, right? You have to think of these clauses that money is an incentive and an investment. And so when you're letting people know that your bottom line will be impacted by what you miss and your oops,
mhm,
that they will be a little more attention to detail. So again, we write clauses. When we talk about force majeure, then we need to talk about these these EDI clauses as
mhm.
much as, and we don't even have to call them EDI or DDI. DEI, we call them a matter of life and death, or whatever. It's a
Right.
clause to go in our contract. Then after the contract, it's the confirmation. And I feel like I can make a whole acronym, off of this alone. But it is that confirmation of the BEO, whether it's 2 weeks before, 2 days before, 2 hours before in that pre-con. Confirmation, confirmation, confirmation of those restrictions, those preferences of, what will happen if this does get by us. How are we going to uh, call on medical professionals? How are we going to respond if there's an
Mhm,
incident like a hazelnut free allergy? And then it's communication, right? We're constantly,
mhm,
like I said, as a day of event support, I'm constantly communicating what I read in that registration form, right? And so maybe
mhm,
that's a part of the process that I missed in that RFP contract confirmation process. This is also happening on the external end with your attendees when you're building that registration page and
right.
who's on your team to intersect that information and notify everyone on your team. And so there seems to be two processes happening. One that's happening externally, or with
Mhm,
your and how you're
yep,
communicating this is being handled, and internally with your team and with that F&B team. And that process, like you said, a lot of people don't spend enough time with this, needs to be thought of in advance, right?
right.
So
Yep,
when you're making that initial inquiry, when you talk to that sales team, that rep who is selling you that venue, before you even give me a list, I'm an advocate of gluten-free, vegan, vegetarian. I know that my audience is this percent this.
yep,
Show me venues that have this, trained staff that
right.
have
Mhm,
so forth and so on. So create your process is what we're saying, so that we are proactive rather than reactive. That is
right.
the
And 100% that is the goal. I mean, and it's how do you and I have so many different ideas that come through this. It's like even the woman, well, actually 2 years ago, we had a woman attending an event who's Orthodox Jew, and it
mm,
was Passover, and so she had never traveled for Passover before, so she and I were learning at the same time. But one, trying to find a caterer that would cater for her during Passover, right? But again, I saved my client $2,500 by asking the other two people who asked kosher, and they just needed labeling correctly, right?
mhm,
But this year, when we're going through registration, this year and last year going through registration, or her name was not popping up on my attendee list with people who requested or said they had dietary restrictions. So
Mhm.
I called her and I'm like,
Mhm.
hey, just making sure that you're coming. And if you are, I want to make sure the details are in place. And she's like, Tracy, I so appreciate your phone call, but I'm about to have a baby. So I won't be there. So,
Mhm.
but it was knowing your, so Amelia, kind of going back to that question is one, knowing your attendees,
Mhm.
and the historical data, the history of what was requested in the past, and picking up the telephone and making those calls, that should be part of that process. But also know that even though Zoe's coming this time, maybe Zoe got diagnosed with cancer or with celiac disease since the last time, and she
Right.
didn't note on anything on the last time. So you don't know how things might change,
Right.
or vice versa.
Yeah, and I think again, when I've had many discussions around, and we talk about this, that it is ADA compliance. Food
Hmm.
allergies are a part of ADA compliance, right? And so,
Hmm.
I've had this conversation with you and Joshua Grimes about
Hmm.
DEI and the law, right? So that people understand this. And so, when you are talking about a lawsuit that you're facing, what you now have to prove is that you have a process, so
Hmm.
that
Yep.
you can go back as far to the initial inquiry, the RFP, the contract, the confirmation, go down the line, so that when you're trying to say, this was an honest mistake, let me see your process. So without that, um,
Hmm.
you know, maybe in your process now, it's when you get notified that there are 5 people that have different food restrictions and food preferences, maybe that's a pre-call with them to fully
Hmm.
understand their needs,
Right.
and also
Hmm.
what it speaks to, now we're getting into food preference that is dependent upon someone's religious beliefs or their
Hmm.
culture, their heritage, right? And so a lot of people, and I've done this kind of general test with people, don't know what kosher and halal are, right? They've
Hmm.
heard terms. They think they know, oh, that's Jewish, that's Muslim, okay. But do you understand the history behind it? And so, as an EDI consultant, I talk a lot about history so that it will deepen people's awareness and empathy around how this is very important to that person, right? Because it's
Right.
their religious identity, and not eating leavened bread, shemetz, right? Like making sure that you are avoiding that food during Passover is imperative for someone who is a
Hmm.
practical or Orthodox Jew, right? And same on the side of being Muslim, making sure that you're abiding by your religious practices. It's more than something that is just passive, like, oops, my bad, I made that mistake. Just like with the hazelnut allergy, it is up
Right.
to F&B team now to educate themselves. So not just on food handling, like with Serve Safe, not
Hmm.
just on, the different hazelnut or nut-free zone, but now this is where, social equity response training, something that I talk about, comes into play, understanding social
Hmm.
identities, right? And
Right.
so if you, at this moment, if you are listening and you do, because for the sake of time, right? If you do not know both the history and have an understanding and comprehension of both kosher and halal, pause for a minute. Whether you use Spark AI, which was featured at that conference, um,
Right.
and Chat GPT, the dictionary, YouTube, you have so many resources at your fingertips. Commit today, to this week, to this month, to learning more about both, because I will tell
Right.
you, I've had people share with me who do practice kosher or halal say that they went to an event, they paid the same amount as someone else attending. They knew that there
Hmm.
weren't going to be any foods for them. And instead of making the event planner's life harder, that's how they feel, they've eaten out in their car. They've brought
Hmm.
food. Absolutely not. And
Right.
so in order to prevent that, to make sure that people are having an equitable experience, education's the
Yeah.
answer, and more
Yep.
conversations like this.
Well, I'll post two links to two videos. One, I interviewed Yvonne about halal, and goes, it's a fantastic interview educating us all about halal. And
Love that.
then another one on kosher. And just
Mm,
before Passover and Ramadan this year, I purposely
mhm.
did it so that we all understood what we could
Yep.
do, because it is that experience. But you also just reminded me of a post that I saw yesterday or today from
Mhm,
David T. Stevens about an event he recently attended, not the same one you and I were at,
mhm.
but he went into that opening reception, never been to this event, went into that opening reception having just finished working out and wanting a non-alcoholic beverage. And the only thing that they served was soda. And
Yeah.
so he said in his post, he said he scanned the room, spent
Mhm.
10 minutes in there, and then left. And is
Yeah.
that the experience that you, just like you said, that
Yeah.
person eating in the car, is that the experience that you want your first time attendee to have by
Yep.
not serving, you know? So we have to think, even not just the food that we're serving, it's the beverages that we're serving too, right? And how do we develop that experience so that it's thoughtful,
Yep.
going back to the labeling, right? It's thoughtful, it's detailed,
Mhm.
and it's purposeful, and it's transparent.
Yeah. Two things come up for me, and again, I know we could talk for hours.
Right. Yes.
But labeling and mocktails, those are the two things that
Right.
I definitely want to wrap our minds around, right? I'll start with mocktails because I literally just had this conversation with another colleague named Matt Bowles. He is the host of the Maverick Show, another show that you all should talk. I love how you all do these
Okay.
podcasts. And the last time that him and I met was at Latino Travel Fest. And so we were in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and just meeting him, great personality, great energy. And I was working the registration table. I was the event producer, but I also do multiple things on site. And so he says, "Hey, do you want a drink?" And I was like, "Sure." He was like, "Okay, I'll get you the pina colada," because that was like the featured drink. I mean, Rancho Mateo was the restaurant, had this amazing, big, huge glass with all the decor, the tequila bottle turned upside down, amazing. Like it was like the feature of the event. And so he brings me this pina colada. And I had already made up in my mind that I was really slowing down on drinking. But you can't turn down this amazing beverage, right? So I take a sip and it's full of sugar and full of alcohol. And I'm just like, I have 3 more events this weekend. I do not need this big drink. So I push it to the side. And I guess there were other people who wanted to bring me drinks. So by the end, there were like 3 or 4 alcoholic drinks sitting at the table, people being nice. And so I'm
Uh-huh.
talking to him recently and I say, he was like, "Okay, so when we talk, what drink will you be having? What kind of wine?" And I said, "Actually, Matt, I'm not drinking anymore." He was like, "But at Latino Travel Fest, I brought you the," and I was like, "Yeah, even in that moment, I was saying that I don't want to have alcohol. Like that is not something that is a
Hmm.
feature of, me having a good time." And so mocktails are a way, again, thinking about the process, ginger and mint and turmeric and all these
So
amazing
awesome.
elderflower, all these amazing events. But when you do serve those drinks, the whole point of my story being, do not serve the featured drink with the pina colada and the flamingo and the upside down tequila all fancy, and then give somebody a red cup of cranberry juice. Create the
Hmm.
experience in which the
Hmm.
mocktail matches the experience of,
Yep.
that alcoholic beverage. And that's whether that person wants juice or they're not having sugar and they want water. Same thing for water. I drink my water in a wine glass, because I'm fancy.
Right.
Know? So mocktails at an event are important. And I've also teach this EDIS course, Event DEI Strategic course, and have participants write blogs. And one of the participants one year, and I wish I could recall her name, amazing blog that she wrote on herself as a recovering alcoholic and wanting to see
Wow.
no alcohol at events. She loves our industry, but she's thought about getting out of our industry because of how much events center alcohol. So that's a whole nother podcast,
Wow. Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
that's a whole nother session. So mocktails. The other one that you mentioned that I just have to, and this is definitely a longer conversation as well. But labeling, like whether there are food restrictions or allergies, label everything anyway. I want to know what I'm
Yeah.
eating. I don't want the
Mhm.
mystery dip. 7-layer dip
Yeah.
is great, but I don't know what you put in your 7 layers. Can you tell me, please,
Mhm.
so that I know
Mhm.
this is going to,
Yeah.
match my taste buds? So yes,
Right.
mocktails and
Yeah.
labels.
Oh, 100%. And there's I was trying to find it in going back to the mocktail thing,
Mm,
non-alcoholic adult beverage as well.
yeah.
Um, my friend Jen Gilhoy tagged me on this post, but a meeting planner, and I want to find her, but she said because they've added
Mhm.
non-alcoholic adult beverages to their event and it's a fundraiser, they've actually grown their
Yeah.
fundraising number. They've exceeded their fundraising numbers. They've actually gotten new donors because of it
Yep.
and expanded it. And I'm like, I need to find her name because I want to have her on the show to talk about that.
Yes. Yeah.
And it counters what a CSM told me earlier this year. She's like, "Well, nobody ever requests it." And my biggest thing is like, because it's not on the bar for me to know that it's there to be at to ask for it, right? And
Mhm.
this is all my non-alcoholic things. And even a guy, 2 weeks ago at my event in San Antonio, he came up and asked for the athletic beer, and he did not know me from Adam. I was just standing there
Mhm.
talking to the bartender, and he said, "These events get so alcohol intensive. I need to have this athletic beer, which is non-alcoholic beer, so that
Wow.
I can moderate myself." And I'm like, "Oh, can I just record you, please?"
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then that just, oh, so many things come up, right? The peer pressure. People would
Yeah.
love to
Mhm.
say that, I'm 43 and that peer pressure isn't a thing, right? I've
Right.
been in spaces where I say, everybody's ordering drinks and I was like, "Oh, do you have cranberry and ginger?" And people are like, "You're not drinking? Like, what's wrong? Why are the—" I'm like, "How old are we? Are you really making fun of me because I've made a choice that's going to make me comfortable?" And
Right.
that's me, right? I can speak up for myself, but that's not everyone. And there are
Right.
people who are making choices to fit in, to make sure they win that business, maybe, an opportunity to speak to that person. They want to, match the drink that they have in hand. They want to have that conversation around, what type of scotch, what type of whiskey are you having? What type of ginger do you have? What type of cranberry
Right.
juice? Like 100% juice. And I love to
Right.
throw a curveball into conversations because we have to understand peer pressure. And I understood it the most when I read the blog, and that's
Mhm.
why I do the blog as part of the certificate, because testing, not everybody's good at taking tests, right? And so I
Right.
give people the option, test or blog or both if you want to do it. And so when she wrote this and she told her story from coming up back of house, as a culinary food and beverage, and how much drugs and alcohol are a part of, you know, growing in that industry or growing in our industry,
Wow.
because late nights, right? Going
Mhm.
out to cigarette breaks, getting drugs because your feet hurt so bad, drinking alcohol because it's a social thing, right? And then her reaching her breaking point to now trying to re-enter the industry and build herself in her career again, and seeing that the bar was literally like the center with people hanging and floating over the
Mhm.
bar. Buy alcohol. Bar's about to close. Make sure you grab 2 drinks and da da da. And that pressure of people saying, "Hey, here's a drink. I got you a drink. I got you a drink," and it's like overwhelming and overstimulating.
Mhm.
And
Right.
so when we have the food and beverage conversation, we can concentrate on the food, but let's talk about the beverage.
Right.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
super important. Yeah.
And and kind of on that conversation and reeling this back in and maybe taking it back to a little bit of Amelia too, her question of what are some tips to do this, it is having that conversation way up front with the
Yeah.
bar manager,
Yeah.
not just or the food and beverage director, right? Not just that CSM, having that conversation with that bar manager and what do you have? But a lot of the stuff, and I will be honest with you, a lot of the stuff is still hard to get, right? And it
Mhm.
depends on who those hotels and those convention centers have contracts with for that distribution. And so
Yeah.
it may be XYZ distributor can't get that. Well, freaking order it on Amazon or
Yeah.
call that manufacturer
Yeah.
directly and
Yeah.
purchase it, right? Because you know you've got this group in here, you're going to make bank. And I don't know why that's my new term, but you're going to make money on it, right?
Yeah.
and and for me as a meeting planner, I'm like, if I can fulfill my food and beverage minimum by selling 15 of non-alcoholic, even if it's 15, that's 15 at $15.
Yeah.
I just made my food and beverage minimum on that way. And hotel, you just upsold a $5 Coke or $8, $9 Coke, whatever
Mhm.
they're charging for $15, right? You just made seven more dollars, right?
Mhm.
On
Yeah.
whatever that is. But it so it, part of it does come down to that. In Zoe, our conversation, what, 2 years ago, a year ago,
Mhm.
the diversity of suppliers, right?
Yep.
Who
There it is.
who are you getting your non-alcoholic? Rethink who you're getting that stuff from.
Right. Right. I think, and this is a shameless plug, right? If someone out there who is a curator of like elixirs or non-alcoholic
Mhm.
beverages can sponsor me and I'll talk about mocktails at events.
Right.
But yeah, there's
I
so many,
will 100% do the same thing, and I actually know a
right?
handful or more
And
of them.
if you're
Yeah.
coming across my Instagram, and there's also this place in Atlanta called oh gosh, I'm gonna social. It's like the social club. I have to send it to you. It's a
Okay.
whole bar experience. The woman has a whole story. Anyway, but going back to what can we do, right?
Mhm.
I really think about what is the experience that you want people to have, and we understand what alcohol is for. Lower that the inhibition and supposedly cause people to relax because it's a
Mhm.
depressant, all those things, right? And is that the experience that you want people to have, especially if you have an 8 a.m. keynote or even a 6 a.m. exercise activity? Do you want them to have to make the choice between staying up late drinking alcohol all night, even though that's going to be available at restaurants and everywhere,
Right.
or attending the content that you so well curated? And so you have to think about that. And I know that a lot of money comes in from alcohol. But there's something else that you brought up that really spoke to me, and that is the diversity, supplier diversity, or just the responsibility of the supply chain in this whole process. So I've
Mhm.
been to events like Catering Source, and we've actually
Cater
spoke
source.
Cater Source. Oops, Catherine, I'm sorry, Cater Source. um, and we spoke at that event together, and there you have the XYZ suppliers, and
Mhm.
when you're talking to them, about the massiveness of distribution and how these different venues and hotels they order in bulk, right? And when I'm talking to them about supplier diversity, like how these smaller businesses who have these innovative ideas, such as elixirs or gluten-free pizza or whatever, that they've come up with, because typically entrepreneurs, small businesses are solving a problem for themselves and their business
Mhm.
grows out of that passion. Now, how do they build this relationship with a distributor or supplier that large to make sure their product gets into these venues? And then the buyers of for these venues and hotels, how are you setting yourself apart? Right? Like,
Mhm.
yeah, you can get the Snickers, the M&Ms, and all the traditional, items,
Mhm.
or can you
Yep.
brand yourself as the gluten-free, the nut-free zone, these different, branding that speaks to the growing needs of our globally diverse, society, where people are saying, I want an experience where I feel seen, where I
Right.
belong. And
Mhm.
I've seen a lot of cruises and resorts that cater to vegans only. And I'm like, oh my
Mhm.
gosh, I'm not a vegan yet, but I've started to incorporate more recipes. And I'm kind of speaking to a guy who's super fine that's a vegan. So it's advantageous. But so, going to a resort that's vegan only, right? I know
Mhm.
that everything I'm gonna enjoy is gonna be delicious, and it's so
Mhm.
how can we encourage both the buyer to buy these products so that they or know where they can source these products, to speak to the RFP that's making these requests? And how can the suppliers now start to see, hey, you're going to have buyers who are looking for these different,
Right.
products. Again, because when you talk about vegan and vegetarians, we don't want just and I say we, so you see I'm manifesting this.
Yeah.
We don't want just a head of lettuce with some drizzled on vinaigrette, right? That's not what
Right.
vegetarian or vegan is. We want an experience, a dining experience. And so suppliers need to work and collaborate, source from smaller businesses or people who are introducing or
Yeah.
presenting these products. And so that's a bigger
Yeah.
in that process. Now we're going into the supply chain. So,
Right. And it reminds me of a conversation I put myself into at the National Restaurant Show 2 years ago. I walked
mhm,
up to Red Plate Foods, and which is a, muffin cookie, brand that is free of the top 14 allergens. So,
mhm,
no
mhm.
gluten, no sugar, or not sugar, but, and it
Should
was the best prepackaged ginger cookie I have ever had in my life. I mean, it just melted in your mouth. But I walked up to her, and she was having a conversation with a food distributing company.
Mhm.
And and I he was about to walk off, and I said, "Just," I said, "Can I ask you a question?" And he's like, "What?" And I said, "How do I get her food into
Yep,
my events at hotels?"
yep.
And he
There it is.
looked at me dumbfounded.
Yep,
And he had to run off to another meeting, but she thanked me profusely for that question,
yep.
because what they're wanting, that distributor wants pallets of her food. But there's,
Right.
to stock up and whatever, but there's not the request from the hotels, going back
Mm,
to that CSM, that says, "Well, we don't get the request." Well, yeah, you do, from our
yeah,
meeting planners. You all just kind of shut us down.
right.
And but it is that back end of the conversation of, where
Yeah,
do we have to infuse these smaller companies in here to get the distribution,
yeah.
and to
So
help them grow.
So two things that irritate me, right, is business as usual, that
Hmm.
distribution company who is just like, if you don't operate at this level,
Right.
mass production, then we don't do business with you. That's business as usual, and it will not even give the small business an opportunity to be able
Right.
to scale to mass production. And maybe
Hmm.
you don't need mass production for everything because it can dilute the product, right? So
Hmm.
business as usual irritates me. And then people who say, well, we're not getting the request, so we're not going to even think about
Right.
integrating these concerns. And when people say that, and that's been said to me live in a webinar or a workshop. And I said, have you ever considered that the reason why you're not getting these requests because people don't see that you can accommodate or that you're even interested in accommodating their needs? That you're not even speaking to their identity or their concerns or your response, like the people who will laugh at me if I order a mocktail. People don't want to endure that kind of response, so then they don't say what their needs
Hmm.
are. Like the gentleman who was practicing kosher, who said he eats in his car, he felt like a nuisance. He felt like he was
Hmm.
bothering the event planner. And I had to say to him, I was like, no, like, did you pay the same amount to go to that
Hmm.
event? Were you sitting at that table and you let a plate of food sit in front of you that you weren't going to eat and then dismissed yourself to go have your lunch in the car? You're not a nuisance. That event planner, that catering team needs to know what your
Right.
needs are, right? You
Right.
matter, right? And so
Yeah.
it's empowering people, it's empowering the staff, it's empowering ourselves through education. It's going through the process that we currently have, assessing that, and then creating a process that is inclusive. I always say this, that if we are combating systemic oppression, systemic being that it lives in our processes and how we do things, and we kind of react or do things
Yep.
mindlessly,
Hmm.
um, we need to counter that with systemic inclusion, right? And so
Yeah.
we need to create processes and procedures that are intentionally inclusive to achieve equitable outcomes. And that's the only way we're going to do this,
Yep.
and so that result is diversity, because we have to
Right.
create this environment where people say, oh, I can go to that event, I can work at that place, I can enjoy that experience, because I know that the food and beverage
Yep.
experiences are going to represent me, and what I need. Or I know that before arriving at that event, if I put it on my registration form, that there is a team that is going to handle this properly.
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
assured of that. So I'm gonna have loyalty to that company because they
Right.
see me, because they care for
Hmm.
me. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. We just hit an hour.
There we ooh, you
I
know,
know.
look,
Yeah.
I don't think I have any other meetings. Let's keep talking, Tracy.
We
No,
need
just
to just keep talking. Devin piped in great. Love the story experiences, and Carolyn's like great conversation, ladies. Um, it is. I mean, and it's we just need to keep having these conversations though, because
Mhm.
and maybe let's call it Tahira. Tahira, let's have this conversation at IMAX.
Yeah, I'm here
Yeah,
for it. While we're
yeah,
eating.
right. Yeah, let's do that. Oh, Tahira, where are you? I'll email
Yes,
her.
okay.
Yeah, and even it, we have to continue having these conversations, and going back to Amelia's thing, it is not an easy thing, and it's you're
Mhm.
not going to solve it overnight,
No.
and you're it just do one thing, right? Say, hey, I want to make sure that everything is labeled with the top 9 allergens, and
Mm,
let me tell you right now, it is coming. It is required in the EU. It has
yeah,
been written into the US food code,
yeah.
and 4 states have accepted. Four states plus Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands have said,
Mhm.
yes, we're adopting the food code as is. How that's going to come about, we don't
Yep.
know yet, but it is coming that we have to label to say, hey, it includes the top 9 allergens.
Yeah.
So, but
It's
I mean,
the
that's one little portion of our conversation, but yeah.
I mean, that's an important portion. I think we could break down this 1 hour into segments, right? What
Hmm.
you're talking about is legislation, and that is
Right.
definitely something that I'm digging more into: policy, legislation, and learning so much about. When you, as event planners, that and I say I do this work, EDI, within the event planning, hospitality, tourism industry, because it is our responsibility to bring people of all different walks of lives and identity together. And we establish this blueprint with every single event that we do on how to be and build a more inclusive society, right? So we as event planners have to start educating ourselves on legislation. And legislation is often driven by like what's going on with our health, our environment,
Hmm.
all kinds of things. And so if you understand that, heart disease and diabetes are on the rise, right? That's tied to our food, right? And so
Hmm.
if the food code is reflecting, hey, how do we eliminate these ingredients, these products? Because there's this meme, and I don't know if it's a meme, what you call it, but they talk about sugar in the brain, sugar in the
Yeah.
heart, sugar in the stuff. Those are different diseases, right? And so too much sugar and causes, is a life and death, issue, right? And so if now we're saying in the US code, the food code, that we need to reduce sugar in are some of our favorite foods, it's no one taking away something from you or
Right.
taking away something that you love. It's trying to get you to live longer, right? And so how do
Right.
we incorporate that into our events, right? That I remember when I first started having this conversation before I met you, there was a friend of mine who was doing, and she vulnerably told this story, a conference for like the Diabetic Association, and didn't even think about it when she planned her food, that the whole like continental breakfast
Hmm.
had donuts and all kinds of jellies and everything on the layout. And it was like they all arrived kind of like, like, what is this? Like, we can't, what are you doing? And it was like, what do you, oh, I got
Hmm.
it. I completely missed the mark, right?
Right.
And so understanding, having that level of awareness is part understanding legislation and policy. We have to understand
Right.
how to incorporate our understanding of these laws and
Hmm.
policies into our events, because that
Yep.
means it is reflecting our global society once again. So
Yeah. a
yeah,
hundred percent.
we could break this into so many segments.
We can, and just talking about legislation and what one person can do. My friend Leanne did get the FAA to make changes to the FAA's regulations about food allergies. But these 2 kids who were in New York City attending an event, his sister went into anaphylactic shock, and nobody on site had EpiPens, and her like, and I don't know the full story, but
Yeah.
they took it to the state, and it
Yeah.
is now required in the state of New York that
Yeah.
any venue with more than one that can hold more than 1,000 people is required to have epinephrine on site.
Makes sense. I
It
mean,
does. Yeah.
yeah. That's
So
that process.
two teenagers made that
Right.
happen, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And this
but
is a
big
conversation
push.
too, and I hope that we can send this, directly to US travel, right? And
Yeah.
I'm one that likes to say names. And so out of respect for you, I haven't said names of companies
Yeah.
and conferences, but I think it's important that people know that we are watching, we're holding you accountable, right? And so
Hmm.
I go to an event annually that I love, Destination Capitol Hill, and we talk a lot about legislation around, modernizing airports and making sure that there are jobs and visas and this and that, and it's really important. I'm not going to, belittle the focus of Destination Capitol Hill. When we're talking about this conversation around food and beverage and ADA compliance and
Hmm.
that kind of legislation that impacts EpiPens at an event, this is something that needs to be talked about at that level. So maybe it's
Yeah.
not Destination Capitol Hill, but where is the lobbying, the advocacy around these conversations? When we talk about
Right.
EDI, when we're making sure somebody's experience is not just a matter of aspiration, but it's operationalized, that it's
Hmm.
impacting that bottom line, that it's impacting your ability as an event to get cleared or,
Right.
in executing events. Where are we having that conversation? And I
Right.
feel like it's not happening at the level that it needs to be happening,
Right.
or there's a disconnect. It's happening in silos, and the people, yourself, myself, and individuals who are having this conversation, like Aurora, Benton, Estrapto, right, who are
Right.
having these conversations, who is hosting us to make sure that this becomes a part of legislation, this
Right.
becomes a part of an industry certification, because it is the bread and butter of
Hmm.
of an event, right? It is
Right.
maybe gluten-free bread, but
Right.
and vegan butter. But it is the center of our event, and this conversation not only needs to be had more frequently, the
Yep.
takeaways need to be implemented. Period.
Hmm. Yep. 100%. All right.
Absolutely.
Devin just jumped because she's got a, but says, thanks for starting this powerful conversation. So I
Oh,
think on that note, the conversations still need to be had, and naming names is one thing, and let's have that conversation offline. Because
I
I
under
have a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, it does have to happen at a higher level. And the fact that Events Industry Council's report says that we as meeting planners, just in the United States, spend
Mhm.
$64 billion on food and beverage. It is a conversation that we should be having.
Absolutely.
Oops, just knocked down my own play.
Uh,
So,
phone ring. Yeah.
so on
Yeah.
that note, send my mother to voicemail. On that note, thank you, my friend.
Yeah, no,
I,
pleasure. I
I,
appreciate you. Yeah.
I
I
appreciate you. And let's continue having this conversation. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. My
mhm.
friend my friend Zoe from Invisibly Allergic was listening on Instagram and things. So, thank you so much, and
Always.
stay with
As
me
they
for
say,
one
I'm
second.
here for it. I'm here for the
Okay.
conversations, and I name names, but, I'll be
Yeah,
careful.
I know. I know. Jenny was just here. Oh, and Jenny. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate it.
Hey, tell
MPI
her
Minnesota.
that, Anthony just called me yesterday, so I'll be reaching out to her soon, and she knows why.
Okay. All right. Okay. Awesome.
All
Well,
right.
thank you everybody for tuning in. I appreciate it. Zoe, don't go away from me.
I won't.
And until next week, stay safe and eat well. Thanks.